Thank you, Mr. Hall. Hey, a number of years, actually in the mid-90s, after I stopped attending with Worldwide Church of God, I had an opportunity to go to Baltimore, Maryland for a business trip. And at that time, my sister was still attending Worldwide Church of God. So I decided, it's Sabbath, go to church. So I went to Worldwide. That was my last time I attended at Worldwide Church of God. But while I was there, I got talking to an individual. And the interesting thing was, he kind of went on a big tirade on, Herbert W. Armstrong. I mean, and he wasn't a perfect man, but it was a little awkward. But then he finished up with a comment to me that has really always stuck with me, and it caused flags to go up all the time. And he said, Herbert Armstrong forbade us from singing all of these really great Christian songs, and now we can sing all this great music. And I was kind of flabbergasted by it, because first of all, he had a bad experience with the Worldwide Church of God. Personally, I didn't. It felt like we were talking about two separate organizations. It wasn't perfect, but yet, my story didn't match his. And the second thing that flagged me was, why are you setting up, no disrespect meant, but why are you setting up Mr. Armstrong as the standard of what's right and wrong, as opposed to God? So, that's always stuck with me. But with that story in mind, I was actually just doing some studying through the book of Deuteronomy. And based on that, I actually learned for me, it was a fairly profound lesson, which to me is actually the overarching theme of the book of Deuteronomy that I'd like to share with you this morning. Many of you have probably already picked up on it. I sometimes am slow on the uptake, but, for me, it was a very, very, very profound thing. So anyway, let's get started. So that's what I'd like to share with you this morning. So, to start with, we all know that Deuteronomy means the book, or the name means the second giving of the law. We are aware of that. But the theme that I'm focusing on today is the fact that there was a reason for the second giving of the law. And it is actually it's a very major reason why the law was given a second time. So let's start by going to the book of Deuteronomy. And if you haven't read it in a while, I encourage everyone to, because it's an amazing book and there's a lot there. So let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 26. Deuteronomy chapter 26, and we'll start with verse 16. This day the Lord your God, the possessive your God, commands you to observe the statutes and judgments. Therefore, you shall be careful to observe them with all your heart and with all your soul. Today, you have proclaimed the Lord to be your God, and that you will walk in his ways and keep his commandments and his judgments, and you will obey his voice. Verse 18, this is an amazing section, an amazing verse. Also today, the Lord has proclaimed you to be a special people, just as he commanded you, and you shall keep his commandments, and that he may keep you set high above the nations which he has made in praise, in name, and in honor, that you may be a holy people to the Lord your God, just as he has spoken. If you catch that, what it's saying in verse 16, we, or they, are giving themselves to God. And also through verse 18, God is giving himself to us, which is very, very profound. And let's just jump back. There's something else I have to read here in the same thing, in the same vein. Deuteronomy 29, and in verse 12. That you may enter into a covenant with the Lord your God, and into his oath which the Lord your God makes with you today, that he may establish you today as a people for himself, that he may be God to you. May be God to you just as he has spoken to you, just as he has sworn to the fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I make this covenant and this oath not with you alone, but with him who stands here with us today before the Lord, as well with him who is not here with us today. You get the significance of that. Major, major, major. God has given himself to them, and we weren't there. But he's also giving himself to us, and he's claiming us. So, the point is here, this is the intro to where I'm really going to. The point is, as a lead-in, is that you can actually go through this whole book of Deuteronomy and read it. The whole thing is talking about God giving himself to us and identifying us as a special people to him. It can be equated to a marriage covenant. When you stand up in front of the aisle and you say, I do. I do. But with any marriage or any relationship, there are expectations, are there not? I'm not allowed to go to the movies with any other women, am I? I have one woman I can go to the movies with. I have one dance partner for the rest of my life. There are expectations. God goes through the entire book. We can go through it, but God gives expectations that He's giving the expectations on what we can expect from him, and also, by going through the law, he's giving on what he expects from us in this intimate relationship. Now, the thing that really jumped out at me, by the way, with that relationship in mind, let's turn to Deuteronomy 28. Deuteronomy 28. And this floored me. As we know, Deuteronomy 28 is a famous scripture. It's a famous chapter in the entire, everybody knows it. It's a blessings and cursings. And you know what smacked right in the middle of the blessings and cursings? Verse 46. So today we're going to go to Deuteronomy 28 and start with verse 46. And he says, and they shall be a sign upon you for a sign, a wonder, in all your descendants forever. And his leading, by the way, he's going through the curses right now. Because in verse 47, because you did not serve the Lord your God with joy and gladness of heart for the abundance of everything. Therefore you shall serve your enemies. And he goes on. Did you catch it? Did you catch it? Let me reread it. Verse 47. Because you did not serve the Lord your God with joy and gladness. When I read that, I've read that over and over and over. When it finally dawned on me. It's not what we do, what he's saying here, it's how we do it. God expects us to do this with joy because that's what somebody who's in an intimate relationship does things with joy. Now, it's also mentioned in slightly different ways too that we're also very, very familiar with. Let's jump over to Deuteronomy 29. Actually, no. Let's go to Deuteronomy 30. Deuteronomy 30 is where I want to go. And in verse 6. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love, intimacy here, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. And down in verse 10, if you obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes which are written in the book of the law, and if you turn to the Lord your God, again, intimacy, with all your heart and with all your soul. It is not just merely obedience. It's not merely, I came to church on Sabbath. How did you come to church on the Sabbath? How did you come to church? So simply put, God, throughout, as he demonstrates in the book of Deuteronomy, he's desiring a close, personal relationship with every single one of us, and all expectations, or in this case we can rephrase this, obedience to his law. He doesn't want it being done as an obligation. An obligation is something you do because, oh, I owe it to you. I owe it to you. Now, it's interesting to note, I've been an engineering lead and an engineering supervisor for nearly 10 years. And over the years, I've come across just about every kind of employee there is out there on the planet. You have, on the one extreme, you have the good employees. And what do you get with the good employees? You get the dedicated people. They sometimes tend to be workaholics, but you get the dedicated people that know what needs to be done before you actually have to task them. And they always do the job 100%. 100%. You can always count on them. You can expect them to get the job done right every time. And what's on the other extreme? You have the people that aren't worth the time of day. They sit at work and they search Facebook all the time. You can't get them to do anything, and even if they do, they're going to do a bad job. Basically, you have the great employees, and then you have the crummy employees. But there's a third group, and unfortunately, and I'm not going to give you statistics because I don't know the answer, but from my experience, the group is big. It's bigger than it ever should be. It's the people there that do work and are there to collect a paycheck. And so they're waiting for you to tell them what to do. I find them almost more frustrating than the lazy employee. And I'll tell you why. There are 3 reasons. First of all, I spend so much energy, or they don't look for initiative. They don't say, hey, that job needs to get done. I'm going to do it. I spend so much energy and time trying to tell them what to do. Secondly, when I finally say, Joe or Steve, whatever name you want to pick, doesn't matter. Hey, I need you to do that task. I never know what kind of job am I going to get. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's bad. Sometimes they'll just give me the minimum just to get the job done. I pull my hair out because I never know, and it gets to the point where I just don't trust them. And thirdly, and the ring is probably the most frustrating for me, they're neither good nor are they bad. They just do things out of obligation. And when I wrote that down in my notes, a light bulb went off. Do you recognize this personality? How about the Laodiceans? They're neither good nor are they bad. They're doing things out of obligation, and God never knows what he's going to get from these people. Just as a thought. But an interesting thing, and many of us can talk about this. A lot of people have experienced it. When is the time in our life when we tend to be most dedicated? How about when we're dating? I tell you, when Tracy and I were dating, I lived about 80 miles away. I would drive 80 miles one way just to see her 2 to 3 times a week. And then I would turn around and go back. Do you know how exhausted I was by the time we got married? We needed to get married so I can get some sleep. But the interesting thing is there was one Friday afternoon. Traffic was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. I could not get out of my neighborhood or out of the area. So I called Tracy and I said, I'm not going to be there. You know what she did? She got in her car and she met me halfway at my parents' house just so we could get together sooner. That's dedication. That's love. I mean, that's enthusiasm, and it's not out of obligation. Right? The beginnings of a very intimate relationship. Now, the interesting thing is, just as a reminder, I would be remiss if I didn't say this or if I didn't quote this scripture. Christ talked about this as well. This is through the entire Bible. Matthew 22. Matthew 22. That's when Christ was asked about the greatest commandment. The greatest. And you know what he said? And in verse 37, Matthew 22, and Jesus said, you shall love intimacy, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Those dedicated workers that I have, they go home and they think about the job. You're dating somebody, you go home and you think about your potential significant other, or you think about the person. I mean, you can't help it. It's all your mind. And you know what? He even extends this, and the second is likened to it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. These are the two commandments and hang on all the law. And so by extension, what God is telling us, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. Hence, not by obligation. Now, there is what I consider a very, very sad story that I do have to relate in here of the poor Israelites. Obviously, we know as they were going through the 40 years, who is a classic example of love or obedience by obligation? The Israelites. They were always getting into trouble, through the 40 years. And you know what? The book of Judges is a book about people obeying just out of obligation. They obeyed because they got punished. But with them in mind, let's all turn to Deuteronomy. Go back to Deuteronomy in chapter 5. And I find this horrendously sad. And if we know if you don't remember, Deuteronomy 5 is the actual time where he gives the 10 commandments. And down in verse 26, this is literally right after. And Moses is reciting that when God was giving the law to the Israelites directly, mind you, on Mount Sinai. And in verse 26, for the Israelites are speaking, for who there is there of all flesh who has heard the voice of the living God speaking from the midst of the fire as we have and lived. And in verse 27, you go near and hear all the Lord our God may say, and tell us what the Lord our God says to you, and we will hear and do it. You know what the problem is here? God is looking for a direct one-on-one relationship with Israel. And you know what they said? Nah, not so much. We need a go-between. And by the way, Moses, you go between. How would that have gone if I had said, I don't know, pick somebody. I can't think. If I'd gone to my brother, hey, Paul, can you go tell Tracy that I love her? I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go. And he goes tell. And you know what? There is no relationship on the planet of any kind that works when you have somebody in the middle. It just doesn't work. And then let's continue on. Verse 28. Then the Lord heard the voice of your words. This is Moses talking now. When you spoke to me, and the Lord said to me, I have heard the voice of the words of this people which they have spoken to you. They are right in all what they have spoken. And in verse 29, verse 29, this is, just remember, this is on the tail end of the 10 Commandments of God trying to speak to them directly. And then God says, oh, that they had such a heart in them that they would fear me in always keep all my commandments, that it might be well with them and with their children forever. You know, as I read that, I could almost feel and hear the disappointment in God's voice. Can you? Can you hear it? Because here he was offering himself for an intimate relationship. And you know what they said? We need Moses to go between us. We'll obey it, but it became out of obligation, and we know the rest of the story. But God continually tried again, and tried again, and tried again. You know, it's really, really, that is really, really, really sad. So what's the takeaway from it? What's the takeaway of what I'm bringing today? It really is quite simple. The entire Bible's theme is one thing and one thing only. From beginning to end, God is creating himself. Through the end, God's going to dwell with men in Revelation 21. God wants a close, intimate relationship. And to have this close, intimate relationship with God, it's not what we do, it is how we do it.